Sanibonani Dumelang, good evening and welcome to episode 265 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. It's a Monday edition of the Private Property Podcast. I hope you've all had a great weekend. You're checking in, of course, on your weekly dose of all things relating to property. To all our new viewers at home, welcome to it. You are tuned in to the only property talk show in South Africa that comes to your screens every single weekday. And to all our regular viewers, from the Top Fan Gang members on Facebook to those of you who are watching us on YouTube as well as on Instagram, welcome back. You know how we do it. Every single weekday at 7 p.m., you and I have an appointment where I'm always in conversation with an expert who helps us navigate our property journey. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're looking to buy, to sell, to build, whether you're a landlord or a tenant, this is the podcast that helps you make the right property decisions. And of course, talking about making the right decisions and watching us, I want to hear from you at home. If you are in, if you're watching, one of the things that I absolutely love seeing from our viewers at home is them essentially marking the register down here below, saying that they're tuned in and ready for this evening's dose of the show. Now, as usual, I always love talking about the other great shows that you can tune into here across the Private Property social media pages. I am talking about the Home Shoppers Show that you can catch on your screens later on this evening at 8 p.m. with Chad. And he also comes to your screens every Friday at 8 p.m. I know that you can also get a glimpse of Chad over the weekend. I absolutely love watching, the shows that Chad does, because it really gives you a glimpse of what is possible out there. And it also, of course, gives you a great insight into some of the great properties that we have on privateproperty.co.za. Now, another show you can look forward to is brought to you by award-winning farmer Umbali Nwoko, and that comes to your screens every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8 p.m. So if you're at home and you've got green fingers or certainly have an interest in all things farming and agriculture, that is a show that you want to make sure you do not miss out on. And on Wednesdays, SC Claassen is always in conversation with people who've walked that first-time home buying journey and have gone on to grow their property portfolio from strength to strength. So do make sure that you tune into that show on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. And of course, there's myself every weekday at 7 p.m. I bring you great experts who help us on our property journey. And I'm going to be doing just that, looking for in a home in 2021. This is particularly relevant for those of you at home who are contemplating selling your property, or perhaps you want to put it up on the market. You want to just make sure that they meet some of this criteria. Perhaps you're looking at, upgrading your property, or you're looking at downscaling into a smaller home, or perhaps you also just want to make sure that you have a little bit of liquidity in your property portfolio. I know that many of us sometimes just want to offload some assets and have a little bit of breathing room, maybe get ready and get up for the next property acquisition, or perhaps just enjoy those surplus funds for yourself. And to help us better understand what buyers are looking for and to make sure that we're also up to date with that, this evening I'm joined by Grant Smee, who's a director at Epic South Africa. Grant, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Good evening, Hazama. Thanks for having me.
It's always such a pleasure to talk to you, Grant. And I want us to get straight into it. But before we do, I want to hear from the viewers at home if you are looking at buying a property this year. Perhaps it might be your first property, or perhaps it's, you're adding onto your property portfolio. If you are, what are you looking for in that property? And also, of course, indicate if you're buying it for yourself, essentially to live in, or you're buying it for investment purposes. I want to hear what you at home are looking for in a property this year. So, Grant, what are some of the, I think before we even look at the key factors that, buyers are looking for in 2021, perhaps just take us through briefly some of the trends that we've already seen in terms of buying sentiment in 2021, because we've reflected quite a lot on the show about what we saw last year. There were certain quarters, I remember quarter 3 with, record high numbers, but a lot of us knew that was because of, the pent up demand from the previous quarter and how the market, unfortunately, a lot of, professionals couldn't work essentially because of the lockdowns, but we know where we can, how we can justify some of the high numbers last year in the various months. And with some experts, saying, look, some of the numbers were sustained in ways that surprised them slightly. One of the questions I've been always asking a lot of my guests off air is, how has business been, so in Q1, I was asking them, how is business in Q1? We're now into quarter two. I've been asking them to just reflect on how business is going in quarter two relative to the previous quarter and some of the trends that they've seen. Perhaps share with us, Grant, some of the home buying trends that you've picked up before we go into what consumers or what buyers in particular are looking for in a property.
Yeah, so it's been quite an interesting thing, and we've obviously got a national view. So we, through our offices, managed to see what's happening in a couple of places. And I think what's remained true towards the end of 2020 into 2021 is this immigration movement. So movement of people outwards from the natural commercial centres, Joburg, Pretoria, even to a degree Cape Town centre, into sort of outlying areas, or moving from up north to coastal spaces. So looking at north coast of Natal down into the eastern coast, or the Eastern Cape, Western Cape have moving from those commercial centres. So that immigration sort of play that's been happening towards the end of 2020 has continued into 2021.
And I think, one of the things that I'm certainly interested in, Grant, is how you think buyer sentiment is going to change in the remainder of the year. We saw last week that the Reserve Bank Governor announced that the interest rates will remain unchanged, and of course many of us wanted it to remain unchanged, and a lot of experts were saying it was going to remain unchanged, even though a lot of consumers may have wanted it to go down. But certainly a lot of the numbers weren't pointing to it decreasing again. I'm interested to find out from you where you think buyer sentiment is going to be, because as much as you're saying, there are many people also moving to coastal towns. There's a part of me that is of the view that only so many people who A, have access to even those properties, or B, would be able to move there, right? Because in as much as a number of us are able to now work from home and fully work from home, with some offices, they still require you to come into the office. Perhaps it might be twice a week. So completely moving location, is off the cards. Obviously, people who've got families aren't going to up and leave to, your more coastal towns. So I think those of us who are perhaps, unmarried or child-free, that kind of flexibility is fantastic, and you're able to access different locations even when you buy and you live. But the reality is a lot of people who are, typically buying are married and often have children. So they have to think about where you're moving, whether they'll have those kinds of amenities, and not pulling your child out of school in the middle of the year, even though, of course, even children themselves are having online schooling. So Where do you think we're going to be headed in that sort of second half of the year?
So maybe just first thing there on this immigration, certainly people moving from commercial centres down to coastal living is one of the big movements. But also a big movement has been from people living in sectional title complexes, smaller blocks of flats, moving towards clusters or small affordable lifestyle estates, which are available particularly in sort of the Joburg area and outlying areas. So there's a movement towards space with I think in the back of people's minds, 2020 lockdown has put them into this position where, like, if we get locked down again, and hopefully, fingers crossed we don't have to, but if we do get locked down again, I don't want to be stuck in a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom flat on the 3rd floor. I want to have garden, I want to have space. I know I need an office space now. So people are looking more for 2 beds, 3 beds, bigger spaces, and a little bit more freedom if things do go in the reverse. That's the first little thing. Secondly, I think there is sort of quite a lot of appetite for buying still. The problem we have is a lot of people have got impaired credit. So I think there's so many people that are going through a process now of repairing and rectifying their credit profiles so they can be in position to buy. But the problem I think we're going to see now is the banks are starting to tighten their lending criteria. They are seeing that there's more risk coming through the market. And although the Reserve Bank held interest rates last week, I do expect that we're going to start seeing more expert sentiments towards a potential increase. And that's the main reason for that is that increase in inflation that we're seeing, which is obviously the thing that drives the Monetary Policy Committee. So a mixed bag, I think, is the answer. For as long as we stay at 7%, I think there's going to be buyer appetite, particularly in that not the affordable range, but the budget range, I suppose, is what we call it. So that's 600,000 to 1.2 million, and that market's going to remain resilient until banks really tighten and we see interest going up.
And I see some of our top fan gang members on Facebook are tuned in. Mkateko Hape, Martha Shingange, Ubongani, Queen B, Mabunda. Certainly want to hear from you at home if you are tuned in and plugged in to the Private Property Podcast with myself, Zamandunga Kumala, as we tackle what are some of the things that buyers are looking for in a property in 2021. And I want to find out from you at home if you're looking at buying a property this year, perhaps you're a first-time home buyer, or you're a repeat buyer, perhaps even looking for an investment property. What are you looking for in a property? And Grant, maybe let's get to that. I think what's the first sort of factor or thing that buyers right now are looking for in a property for the rest of the year?
So I think, the good old adage, location is pretty much the one that sort of remains the tried and tested method of knowing where you want to buy. So we were talking about location. It's a lot to do with space, security, and then the amenities available to you. I've seen a lot of people and having a lot of conversations with people who are just looking for convenience. They no longer want to sit in traffic if they don't need to. They want to live in a space that they have freedom of movement and then obviously the security. So location is vitally important according to where you live your life. If you have kids, where they're in school, where you work, and where other amenities are. So location is pretty much the biggest one at the moment.
I know that at home I'm always making reference to our Facebook top fan gang members, and I've cited some who are watching. I see that some of the members of the podcast family who are tuned in. We've also got Ugabe Muhari who's watching us on YouTube. So do raise your hand down here below. Do show us some love. I want to see if you're watching us. But of course, I also want to know from you at home what you are looking for in a property this year. Whether you're looking to buy for yourself, whether you're looking to upgrade, whether you're looking to downscale, or perhaps looking at adding that property in your property portfolio. So we've got location, Grant, and I know that is an important one. As much as some people say you can play around location, for the most part, if you're looking to live there, as you're saying, you want access to certain amenities as much as possible. And if you're looking for investment purposes, you also want access to those amenities because you know that that's where those are some of the things that your tenants are going to potentially look for. So what's another factor that's very crucial for us to get a sense of in terms of what buyers are looking for this year?
Yes, I mean, I mentioned security, and I think security is vitally important. And what we need to look at is in terms of security in an area, not only what security is provided, but what cost is attached to that security. So, some of the estates you look at, they've got high-end security, but that comes with a hefty levy bill. So combined with location, security, amenities comes with the costs of owning those properties, both for yourself and for your potential tenant. And then in considering those factors, you move forward to looking at the costs on investment side. How do the costs affect my returns for the future? And one of the things there we look at, you mentioned, is when you're buying for investment, you buy for demand, definitively. And those amenities that create demand come at a cost. So which does affect your yield.
I'm going to bring in a question, Grant, that was asked a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about levies and just how the levy prices keeps going up. And I love that you've brought this in when it comes to the issue of security, because as you're saying, oftentimes security does come at a cost, whether you are paying it in a freestanding property or if you're living in a lot of these estates or complexes where you have to pay for that additional security. This question is particularly for viewers at home who are investors and are worried about the increase in levies. How can they best manage the rising costs of levies and of course the various other things that come with owning a property in a sectional title community with the bottom line? Because as you've said, the investor is looking at the bottom line. So you almost want to get a sense that by paying levy X, and even though it's increasing, it doesn't, ultimately eat into your bottom line in such a way that you are, it's decreasing your yield significantly. and essentially making you run at a loss. So how can investors almost weigh that up as much as possible? Because the reality is we're going to continue investing in sectional title communities because that's also the nature of, the building that's happening. Not everybody's going to own, freestanding property, and not everybody should necessarily. But in the same breath, the costs are just escalating at the rate where rental isn't escalating at a similar rate. So how can especially investors just look at the increasing levy costs and what it essentially brings them in terms of the type of tenant that they're even able to attract?
Yeah, so the ongoing conundrum of the investor versus homeowner, trustee budgets versus not. So the best way to control obviously the budget and increasing costs is to become a trustee yourself. If you're an investor, you are going to be looking at the financials, you're going to be working on the budgets, you're going to be working with other trustees on controlling those costs as much as possible and making sure that there's no wastage or over expenditure in place that they don't need to, so that you can control your costs. Why I say it's a conundrum is that often investors will become trustees and then try and minimize those costs to the detriment of the entire complex, because they want to make sure that their levies are low and therefore increasing their investment return. So that's the ongoing conundrum for an investor in this space. But if you take the position that, again, property is a long-term investment, and for as long as you're looking after the entire complex, that increases the value of your property, then you should find that good balance between returns in the short term and returns in the long term. So my first step, if you want to really control the costs on levies, you become a trustee in the first instance. If you don't have the time to become a trustee, get involved at the AGM, give your opinion, vote on the to approve or help approve the budget, and go through that process.
We are taking your questions and comments at home as we look at what buyers are looking for in a property in 2021. I've been asking you, of course, at home, what you are looking for in a property in 2021. Doesn't matter whether you're looking to buy your primary residence, you're looking to upgrade, to downscale, or perhaps looking at adding that property to your property portfolio. We've got a comment coming through from Umgateko Ahape saying that location and cash flow positive and potential to positively cash flow even more is one of the things that she is looking for in a property. We've got Yogi Matsilibe on Facebook saying that space, quality, and the price are the things that she is looking for. And Martha Shingang is saying that I want community with enough space between us in a quiet neighborhood and with great amenities in close access. And that's actually such a difficult one to get, that sometimes you're in a sectional title community, getting the space between, units is a very difficult one. You can often hear your neighbors, in your block, you can essentially hear everybody. So if you want to live in an estate where there's sufficient space between your neighbors, where you don't hear, the conversation that they're having when they're in the kitchen, for example, during brunch, those are some of the things that she wants. And I see here that Farana Siddiqui saying that location and space are crucial to her. Martha adding on that security is also another top priority, and that's one of the things that Grant had highlighted was actually second. So then, Grant, what is then another factor that buyers are looking for in this market?
So accessibility within the estate. So if you're looking at section title complexes, often you'll go and see a 2-bedroom property on the top floor, or third or second or third floor property. So some people do want accessibility again to spaces, vitally important. So we are seeing a tendency towards garden units or units that have access to open spaces. So some examples would be the Summercon developments out in Joburg that have got quite big open spaces that you can make use of. So that's quite an attractive option for people to take on, and that they're looking for is certainly accessibility. And then one of your guests there, or one of your viewers, they mentioned quality of properties, quality of finishes. And I think what we've seen a lot of slapdash developing, particularly in the Joburg space, where they're using very substandard materials and finishes. And I think although that was prevalent in the boom 2011, 2012, a lot of that stuff went up and actually sold. I think what people are becoming aware, or they're becoming far more savvy in terms of looking at a property, looking at the price, and then looking at the finishes. And you can see that in the Baldwin developments, the Summercon developments that have carried on building and growing and keep selling out. And I think it's really a testament to the quality of build that they have as well.
You know, when you talk about the quality of the finishes, I think one of the things, unfortunately, is that when we did see the quality of finishes not being at the level that it ought to have been, those complexes are obviously still there, they're still running, and are unfortunately facing the repercussions of developers who are, quite frankly, just greedy, right? Because you are buying very cheap material, making sure that you're putting cheap finishes, as opposed to just putting better quality finishes, especially considering that people are going to live there for a fairly long period of time, and people are literally taking on a 20-year bond in order to finance the purchase of that property. And so to people who are looking at buying, I think definitely interrogate the finishes, especially if you're looking at buying into a new development, because that is one of the areas that sometimes developers try to, cut costs, and it really is to your detriment. But as Grant, highlights, we are seeing sort of better quality finishes being put on. I've seen some culprits where the finishes are still not that great. I mean, one of the things, for example, Grant, that I tend to be very pedantic about is when I do an inspection or when I'm viewing a particular property, I look at the quality of the wood that's been used for the built-in units, and would even sometimes go to the extent of either asking them what the wood is. More often than not, I can tell which wood has been used. And so if it's bad wood, I already know that, look, this developer is just cutting costs in all the wrong places. And those are just some of the things that you want to watch out for, because badly built, wardrobes unit, for example, are going to cost you, because they're going to buckle under the pressure of putting your clothes and whatnot in there, and you find yourself 2 years later needing to bring in a carpenter and do a whole unit for you. And these are just some of those costs that you don't think about, never mind being an investor, but even as a normal homeowner, you don't think of checking that before you buy. Something else that you mentioned, Grant, that I almost want to challenge developers out there, and it's been mentioned by our viewers, is of course around the space. As you say, there are some developments that are creating more spaces in the complex of the estates, and where we're seeing more and more garden units. And I know that a lot of developers don't want to cave in on this one, because it would essentially cost them, let's say, X number of potential units, because there's only so much space that they would typically have to work with. And they're working with the bottom line of, we have 200 units. If you want to be giving people, bigger garden spaces, it may just eat into the number of units that we want to do. So I'm certainly interested to see how that's going to look like, because there are so many complexes in Joburg that don't have the greatest space. And I mean, there's just been bullish building. Some are new, some have just been there for less than 7 years. And so you're buying into them. And unfortunately, the space composition isn't the greatest there is out there. So then, Grant, what are some of the factors that viewers can certainly be aware of that buyers are looking for this year?
Yeah, so I just want to mention one thing here is, when you're buying into new developments or any property, but particularly new developments, one thing I really suggest is that people pay attention to the details. So you mentioned wood quality. Yep. I would look at, just a few particular finishes. Although you're pedantic on the wood, I'm particular on tiling. I think it's one of those things.
Yes. My God. Yeah. You're giving me nightmares. So I was actually telling one of my guests last week about how often I buy paint and tiles, but you were saying you're pedantic on tiling.
Yeah, so it's just the alignment of tiles, using the same color grout, edging. Have they put edging in? Sometimes they just cut and just leave it unedged. It's just there's those little finishes start telling you the quality of finishes. Because remember, the tiles are over something. They're over something that they've put into the walls. So what have they put? What quality pipework have they put in the walls? So what are the quality of those finishes? Have they sealed the pipework properly? And I've been a victim to it. I had a property where pipes started leaking in the walls, and it was just a nightmare to repair. So it's just, when you go into a unit, I know it's exciting for particularly first-time buyers, but any home buyer. But look at the details. So go back a second, a third time, and start looking in the cupboards, look at the finishes, look behind the doors, and just make sure. Door locks, sometimes they cut those, the lock holes just all skew and they don't line. Make sure just the door, when you turn the key, it locks, and just start showing you how much detail the developers paid to, or how much attention they paid to the detail in the property. But yeah, so the next one is going to be sort of obviously the interior of a complex and the exterior of a complex are vitally important to your buyers. And then interestingly, there's this big movement towards pet-friendly properties. So people want their pets and want their pets into estates or into complexes, and there is sort of a need and a want. And there's actually interesting a big movement of some complexes to stop pets entirely within their properties, but there's this massive amount of demand for people who do want their pets, who have them as part of the family and do want pets. So there is this need for that type of property. And then the one thing we back on development we speak about is storage space. The number of units that I've gone into these days that don't actually have any storage space, it feels like. You've got maybe a double cupboard in the bedroom and that's about it. Storage space is vitally important within your property, whether it's internal or external, but it is something to consider when you are selling property or if you're looking to buy.
And I'll probably just outline a gripe I tend to have to pick with a lot of developers when it comes to storage space, because you tend to find that when you go in a lot of units, whether those that have been around, let's say 5 to 7 years, and even some shockingly that are fairly new, is that, let's say in the master bedroom, you'll find that the wardrobe is just a double, like just a 2-door, right? And you would think, who has only clothes that would fit 2 doors? In which world is that even feasible? Or both bedrooms would have just a 2-door wardrobe. And I think to myself, even if you were trying to optimize space, these are the things that you should have essentially budgeted for from the onset. Make sure that a master bedroom, at a minimum, and this is me almost being very prudent, at a minimum is like a 3-door, although ideally it should actually be a 4-door wardrobe. And I know how much that actually is into the general bottom line, because it's extra doors per unit multiplied by X number of units that you have. But those are the kinds of things that people who are going to be living there ultimately need, right? Because they shouldn't have to be getting in a wardrobe that they must buy in, or getting in a carpenter to put in another built-in unit because a space only comes with that. So that's quite a big one, and I'm a stickler for that one. And I think it's because I found myself, buying properties that didn't have that, and I've had to put it in a master bedroom. And I thought to myself, I don't know who approved, a 2-bed unit only having 2 doors as a wardrobe. It doesn't make sense at all. So I think to developers out there, you need to do better on that front, because that is just unacceptable. Nobody has such little clothing or things that they need to put into their wardrobe. So then, Grant, what would then be that final thing that buyers are looking for this year that you'd like to share with our viewers?
So, one of the important things, and particularly if you're going to refurb your property, is obviously the kitchen. The kitchen needs to sort of make sense. It is the center of the home. It is a space that you spend a lot of time in. I know some people maybe some people don't spend any time in the kitchen, but I know particularly at the moment, coming out of 2020, a lot of people spend a lot of time in the kitchen. There was a massive influx or increase in people doing home cooking lessons, and I know I personally did a bread baking course. And I think I was not the exception, but more the rule. And the kitchen's definitely the heart of the home, and something that people need to focus on, making sure that there's enough workspace, enough storage space, and enough space for appliances. So when you go into a property, take a look at again what's available to you in the kitchen. And again, if we're going to pick on developers today, let's make sure that the developers put enough plug points into the kitchen, distributed enough for all those appliances, because often that's an afterthought.
Look, Grant, they need to put enough plug points in the unit in its entirety. Because I mean, in a bedroom, I don't see why we only need 1 plug point in a bedroom. As a standard, a bedroom should have 2 plug points because people sleep on either side. They want to make sure that their phones are charged on either side. So it's also about, having developers understand the flow of whoever's going to be buying and ultimately living there, whether it is, homeowners who are looking to live in that development by themselves, or of course, tenants who are going to be living there, regardless of, the owner composition. It's neither here nor there. Ultimately, you really do want to understand the flow of how a person, takes up space within their space and what they do. And you just tend to find that it's not always the most economical in terms of how the flow of the space typically is, which tells me something about the missing link in that particular team, or maybe sometimes somebody loses that particular battle. Because again, I also know the price war that would go into adding that additional, or adding additional plug points into a property, but rather the developer does it as opposed to somebody wanting to do it once they've already bought. I mean, that's actually just a hassle altogether. And if anything, you also don't want people overloading what plug point with an extension and then having 1,000,001 things being plugged in. So I almost want developers to think slightly more long term, and even if it just is into your bottom line, just a little bit, just budget for it, because I think there are other ways you could probably make up for that money.
I wonder if sometimes it's not just a little bit of laziness, and it's not only the developer's fault in terms of planning, but it's also the consumer, because the consumer is not demanding certain things, additional storage. You go to some development units and they'll just have 4-bedroom cupboards stuck on the side, almost like it was an afterthought. Like you said, the 2 double cupboards of 2 double bedrooms is just it's insanity. No communal or storage space in the communal areas. It's just, again, I mean, I don't know where the developers live, but I'm sure they have plenty of storage space in their units. So there's a cost benefit analysis they do and how it hits the bottom line. But again, I agree with you. If they're developing for the long term, they really need to be a little bit less lazy with their design and a lot smarter, and provide things that actually will make living much easier and much more sort of convenient.
Look, I think when we talk about developers being less lazy with the design, there's a part of me that thinks we might be asking for too much, given that, especially in the Gauteng context, a lot of the complexes that are being built are pretty much all looking the same. Yeah. So there certainly is a laziness factor to that. There's a part of me that's like, in as much as you might be one developer building relatively the same, tweak it up a little bit. We don't want to see the same kind of structures going up in different suburbs across the province, because that's ultimately what we're seeing. And I'm not even taking jabs at any developer. I think all of them are actually guilty of this one. Once you've seen kind of one of their developments, you've almost seen all of them. Certainly from the exterior, you can sometimes tell that this is a X development just by looking at it. So I certainly do want a bit more creativity from our developers. I've interviewed some of the developers, Grant, and I know that part of how they do their buying is based on this is, the structure that we have, or this is the design that we have. So it makes buying easier. So there's a part of me that says that just speak to your quantity surveyor. They're able to rerun numbers. It might just add an extra 1 hour really to their day, and that's probably it. We certainly do want to see more creative buildings going up across the province, especially when we just look at the bullish nature of building. In the Joburg area, you at least just want a little bit of variety. But Grant, our time has run up. I think any final tips then, to the people who are looking to buy, and because we've been looking at some of the things that they are looking for, any tip for them in terms of what they just need to be aware of, or certainly consider as a factor to look out for? Because, I think sometimes people, as you say, they'll be excited about viewing and they won't even look out for certain things that could potentially cost them time and money down the line.
Yeah, I think this comes down, and I think every time I've been on the show, I use the same piece of advice: is just don't get emotional about buying a property. It's exciting. It is an emotional process. It is a massive commitment. But the minute you allow emotion to cloud your judgment, you'll overlook the things that maybe in 6 months' time, in 1 year's time, are going to be massive problems. Location being one, amenities being the other, costs and the cost of being in those complexes, for example. So take your time, view a property. Go home, think about it. Don't be pressured by any agents or developers. There's lots of properties out there, and there's always going to be more properties as people add, as new properties come to market. So take your time when you're investing, and be comfortable that you're committing. It's the biggest financial commitment of your life. So just again, remove the emotion.
And that's a great place to leave it at, Grant. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
And that is Grant Smee, who's a director at APIC South Africa. And that certainly brings us to the end of the Monday installment of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. It's a Monday, so you can look forward to the Home Shoppers Show with Chad at 8 p.m. I'll be back on your screens tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.
I'm Brian Kappa. I'm a 10-time South African motorcycling champion. My family and I have chosen to live in Fourways. There's some really great suburbs in our neighborhood. There's a lot of families living in the surrounding areas, in places like Lone Hill and Cedar Lakes. What draws people to Cedar Lakes is that it's so close to Broadacre Shopping Centre, Cedar Square, and Fourways Life Hospital. Lone Hill is a major draw card for many families. It's got some great smaller commercial centres and some fantastic schools like Crawford College. From an entertainment point of view, Monte Casino really comes alive at night. There's so much on the go and there's an incredible energy in the area. Our family just loves the fast-paced lifestyle that Fourways brings. But honestly, the thing that attracted us most to this area was the active lifestyle that it offers. As a family, we've chosen to live in Fourways because of the lifestyle and convenience, and this is our neighborhood.